one isn't really like natural, but of course I've had this as part of my collection for the last year and a half. It's an old newspaper photo of a giant flightless bird called the moa. And the moa was native to New Zealand. It was a large flightless bird that was a herbivore, which means it's an animal that feeds on plants, but of course, and it unfortunately is one of the animals that human beings drove to extinction. And there's one right there, because when the Maoris arrived in New Zealand 600 or 800 years ago, they saw the moas, and of course they viewed them as food, but also cut down a lot of their forests to make a way for their homes. And of course the moas died out a few hundred years ago, as did the giant harpagornis or Haast's eagle that hunted them. Of course, the Maoris had legends of these giant birds, but of course Europeans dismissed them as myths until in 1839, when a huge thigh bone of one of these birds was sent to the Natural History Museum in London from New Zealand, and Professor Richard Owen, who was the founder and curator of the museum, actually gathered enough bones to put this bird back together, and he proved that this was no myth. And of course, next one things I'm about to show you all are some of my shark teeth, and I'm choosing 3 sharks from I've got the teeth of. First one is this. This is the tooth of a mako shark, which is the fastest shark in the sea and one of the most ferocious predators out there. And of course, its teeth is shaped very differently to many other kinds of sharks, because this is a shark that feeds on fish, and they can be quite slippery and could get away easily. So the mako has many of these teeth, and so it can grab a hold of wet, slippery fish like sardines or even things as big as tuna. And of course, they are serrated, very, very sharp. In fact, if I was actually to rub my finger along the end of this for a long period of time, I'd probably end up getting cut. It's that sharp. And the next one is from the tooth from my favourite shark, the tiger shark. Tiger sharks are very fascinating in their own right. I mean, they are probably the most generalist feeders of the sharks, and of course they don't just feed on fish, but they also feed on bits of carrion floating around in the water, but also they feed on seabirds, mammals from dugongs to dolphins, other sharks, and even incredibly sea turtles. And how they do that is because the tooth is shaped a lot like a can opener. It's shaped like a can opener, and that can cut right through the shell of a turtle, which is absolutely incredible. And the final one is probably one that a lot of you have heard of. This is the tooth of a great white shark, and it is the largest predatory fish alive today, and you can probably just about see the serrations down the ends. It's a lot like a kitchen knife, and that's because this shark feeds on prey from fish as big as tuna to mammals like dolphins, whales, and of course its favourite food of all are seals. Of course, what the great white has to do is they use these massive teeth to slice out a large chunk of prey like seals, which can give them a very bad injury. And quite often the shark will just pull back and wait for them to bleed to death. And of course they can have 300 of these inside their mouths. And if I was to be bitten by a great white, it would probably take more than a sticking plaster to patch me up. But But of course the media has made out that sharks are mindless man-eating monsters, when actually almost all attacks are cases of mistaken identity, or if said person is doing something incredibly stupid, and you're more likely in your life to be killed by a falling vending machine, or killed by getting struck by a bolt of lightning while playing golf wearing a gorilla suit. You're much more likely in that way to die than being killed by a shark. Of course, next thing I'm going to show you that is part of my collection are, well, they're not animals, but they are to me still very fascinating. Acorns. Acorns are, of course, the things that grow on oak trees. Of course, they are basically acorns are basically the seeds of an oak tree, and they can take decades to grow into full bloom. Of course, they are actually my favourite British tree, and of course, one reason why oak trees are spread throughout much of England is because of squirrels, because squirrels tend to bury their acorns and then attempt to come back for them later, but of course squirrels don't really have the best memory, and so quite a lot of the time they end up burying their acorns and can't find them again, and then they grow into oak trees. To me, that's a very fascinating fact for me. Next are, of course, as I mentioned earlier, I have always been fascinated by butterflies, and so I recently got these. Some of the butterflies that are found in Europe and, most importantly, Britain. Of course, the largest one here is the Red Admiral. Of course, we see Red Admiral butterflies all the time, but of course, to me, probably the most beautiful is right here. Chalk Hill Blue butterfly, and to me they are probably the most beautiful butterfly I've ever seen. I mean, I only learned about them a few years ago on Spring Watch, and they are, right now, they're only found in a few parts of Britain, like that in southern England, where there are chalk hills that they needed to survive, hence the name Chalk Hill Blue. Of course, they suffered a massive decline in the 1950s and were believed to have gone extinct, but they have made a dramatic recovery and are slowly spreading back to the rest of Britain. And of course, that is quite slowly. And of course, butterflies always start their lives off as caterpillars, and of course, but soon they cocoon themselves and they pupate into butterflies, and of course, to me, these are some of the most beautiful insects in the world. But yeah, of course, I will now move on to the last thing, which is also probably the jewel of my collection so far. It's this. This is an eggshell fragment from the egg of Aethionis maximus, which is also known as the elephant bird. This is it. The elephant bird was found in Madagascar, and it was the largest bird that has ever lived on Earth. Ever. Full stop. And when I say the largest, I mean it stood well over 3 meters tall, and it weighed more than half a ton. Because it was a herbivore, so it was a browser, which meant it fed on low shrubs and trees, but no one is actually quite sure how they went extinct, but I'll get to that bit in a moment. Of course, the elephant bird laid the largest egg on the planet, and of course, the ostrich has the largest egg around today, but the largest egg ever laid was by the elephant bird, and it was about this big, and so it was the largest egg that has ever been laid. And the eggshell is, well, the eggshell is actually quite thick. And of course, no one actually quite knows how the elephant bird went extinct. I mean, it could have been climate change, where much of its habitat, the swampy habitat it lived in, was turned into desert. It could have been habitat loss from when humans arrived on the island and cut down a lot of the forests where they browsed, or they might have been hunted, but a lot of us know today that a modern day ostrich has a kick that's powerful enough to shatter a man's ribs and open his stomach. So I'm not sure if they would have hunted a fully grown elephant bird, and they might have gone for a juvenile because a single kick from a fully grown elephant bird probably would have been fatal like that. I mean, or it could have been stealing its eggs, which must have been a great source of nourishment, or it could have been a combination of all of them. But that's why the elephant bird is no longer with us. Of course, that, ladies and gentlemen, was my natural commodities collection. I hope you all enjoyed, and if you have enjoyed my video, and also just to quickly say, I do apologise for it only being in 3 parts, but I'll explain a bit more about that another time. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed my video on the Natural Commodities Collection, and I hope I helped to educate you all about the natural world and what I do. And of course, I am actually trying to do what David Attenborough is doing, trying to get more people interested in the natural world, because we need to do more to defend, protect it more now, more than ever. Otherwise, we could have another mass extinction event that hasn't been seen since the time of the dinosaurs. But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed, and if you did, please leave a comment down below, and also don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you. Bye now.